Hey guys, welcome back. It's Missy. And if you're new here, welcome. I am a life and relationship coach, and on this channel we get to the root of the issue and we learn how to heal and deal. So if that's your thing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I would love for you to be a part of the fam. Today we're going to be talking about how to overcome uncomfortable emotions. The reason why I call them uncomfortable emotions is because when we hear negative emotions, we think we're not supposed to feel them. And of course I forget sometimes to call them uncomfortable emotions, but I try as hard as possible to make sure I call them uncomfortable emotions, because that's what they are uncomfortable. But when people see them as negative, they then fear feeling them. They will try to distract themselves from feeling their emotions. They will try to suppress their emotions, or they will try to disassociate those emotions. So when that happens, they are not dealing with those emotions, and then they come out in other ways like anxiety, depression, or anger. And this is because you most likely were not taught how to deal with your uncomfortable emotions. You were not taught how to self-soothe, because we learn how to deal with our emotions from our parents. So if you look at your parents, you probably will realize you share some of the ways that you deal with your emotions because you learn from them. So it's important that we understand these uncomfortable emotions, they have a purpose. They're there to help us. They're our body's way of saying, hey, this is a warning, something's off. We need a change. We need to pay attention to something. We need to work through something. And it's so important to be able to identify our emotions, be able to work through them, because that's how we feel empowered. When something happens to us, we want to be able to deal with our emotions in a healthy way. So when we feel uncomfortable, we have these uncomfortable emotions, we feel fear, or we don't want to feel these emotions, so a lot of us will go to suppression. So it's important to understand suppression and repression. So when you suppress your emotions, that means that the minute that you feel uncomfortable, you push it down. And so then when you push it down, it goes into your subconscious. And the way to get it out is by really asking yourself questions to identify what's going on, where it came from, and then you'll eventually come to a conclusion of what it is. So an example of suppression is maybe something happens, you feel hurt, you then suppress that hurt, and the only way to get it out is to ask yourself, what happened to cause me to feel this way? Like, let's go through my events. Oh yeah, I remember that happened, that's why I'm upset right now. Now let's talk about repression. Repression is when you suppress so much to the point where it goes into your unconscious mind. So when it goes into your unconscious mind, you will have a trigger and you won't even realize why you have that trigger, and you can't go back to an event because it's out of your mind. It's in the unconscious mind. So for instance, let's say when you smell asparagus, you get really sick to your stomach, and you have no idea why this happens. You just get so sick when you smell asparagus, and it's because of a repressed memory of maybe when you were a child, you were forced to eat asparagus by your abusive parent, and then you got sick to your stomach and you didn't have anyone to comfort you through that time. So that's what happens with depression. That's why sometimes you'll be able to identify your emotions, and sometimes something will happen, you'll be triggered, you have no idea where it comes from. But with repression, if you really did work, even like hypnosis, if you really went deep into your conscious mind, it would come out. But it takes a lot more work to get to that unconscious mind than it does with your subconscious. So it's important to be aware of this, because when you are aware something's off, you can do the work to identify your triggers. And then with triggers, what you want to do is you want to be able to learn how to work through them. A lot of times people think that when you're triggered, you should avoid it. And that's not true, because then you're overly sensitizing yourself to the point where you now may feel like you live in this bubble, and it's making that trigger something that you're trying to avoid. It becomes like dangerous in your mind. So that's why you don't always want to avoid your triggers. By doing that, you are reaffirming that belief and that thought in your mind. Now, sometimes you may need to avoid your triggers depending on how triggering they are. But the most important thing is you want to be aware of these triggers, so you know this is a time when you need to cope and treat the situation differently. Also, it's important to understand triggers are your responsibility to cope with. And you want to get to a point where you are triggered less, or you have a less emotional reaction to that trigger. So let's talk about your emotions and how they come about. So usually it starts with a situation, something happens, and then we get a thought. And then we get an emotion. Emotion forms. Every single emotion is formed by some sort of thought. and then we gain a perspective from it, and then we act on that perspective. For instance, let's say you were gonna go hang out with one of your friends and he didn't answer your call. You now get a thought of, oh, he's blowing me off. What's the emotion that comes from that? Anger, frustration. What happens after that emotion? You get his perspective. Oh, he doesn't want to hang out with me. Oh, maybe he's out and he's hanging out with somebody else. You then now act off of that. I'm gonna ignore him. I'm gonna go yell at him. Or even, I'm gonna be overly nice so that way I'll get him to like me again. But the crazy thing is that you can change your entire reality by changing your thought. Same situation can happen, but you can see it entirely differently. So let's go through that situation again, but let's think about it differently, have a different perspective. So something happens, you're supposed to hang out with your friend, they don't answer the phone. Your thought, oh, I wonder what happened. Maybe they didn't get to the phone in the time, or they are busy with something. Your emotion, concern, curious, what's going on? Your perspective, I'm unsure what's going on, but I'm gonna wait until I have all the details, all the facts before I come to some sort of conclusion. You're more calm. And so then your action is that you will wait for them to call you back, or you will call them back, or you will move on your day and do something else until you can get a hold of them. And then if you find out they're blowing you off, then rightfully so, you can get mad. But then you can talk it out with them, communicate, understand their feelings, have you clarify your feelings, and then you can figure it out. Another example is something that I heard in a cognitive behavioral class I took one time, which is there's this story. So what happened was this friend asked his friend to come over to his house. And so when the friend came over, he's like, can I make a cup of tea? And the friend that owned the house was like, sure. So he went and he made a cup of tea, and then he accidentally lit a paper towel on fire. The person that did it felt mortified. He was so embarrassed. And the house owner thought it was hilarious. Same situation, two different thoughts and perspectives about it. That goes to show how much we are in control of how we perceive situations. But that's why people have so many different perspectives. The same exact situation could happen, but people think about it differently, which then creates a different emotion, which then creates a different perception. And then they act differently. Not only that, but we also have to talk about anger in general. If you notice your go-to emotion is anger, anger is a secondary emotion. When you are not taught how to properly deal with your emotions or identify your emotions, your first emotion may be anger. Anger is also a learned behavior as well. So if you see anger growing up and you suppress your emotions, you most likely will also react to situations with anger. Even if it's the smallest inconvenience, you may notice you will blow up. And this is because, like I said, when you suppress things, it has to come out in some sort of way. And so your go-to is, or maybe, anger. Now, anger does have a time and a place. Anger happens when something unjust happens to you. But there's also times when really underneath that anger is really hurt. Anger can be used in a healing process of being able to hold other people accountable. But a lot of times, anger is just hiding your real emotion. Usually it's sadness, hurt, frustration, anxiety. Anxiety can be a big one where anger comes out, you know, that irritability. So it's always important to be able to identify what the actual emotion you're feeling so that you can work through it. So let's go into what do you do about this? Like, how do you actually go through your emotions? So the first thing that I always talk about is like self-check-ins. Get to the root. Be curious. What is going on? What caused you to feel what you were feeling? What situation happened? What thought happened? Why do you feel this way? You want to be like a little detective. You want to be like, okay, you know what? I want to get all the details so I can understand what's going on with me. I want that self-awareness. I want to have that healthy inner dialogue. And like I always talk about, journaling can be really helpful with that. Journaling really gets into your subconscious. A lot of times we have things jumbled up in our minds. It gets to that subconscious. You can write it out and figure out what's going on, so you can see it clear on paper, what's on your mind. The next thing is you need to recognize the story that's playing in your head. Bad things happen to us, you know, shit happens, but we come up with our own perspectives about it, and we come up with our own negative feelings about it. When something happens, you don't always entirely know why it happened or why someone did what they did. And we as humans, we don't like uncertainty, so our brains will try to fill in the blanks. That's why you may ruminate, or you may get these thoughts over and over, because your brain is trying to figure out why this happened, because you're uncomfortable and we don't like feeling uncomfortable. So our brains will fill in those blanks and come up with different scenarios of why they did it, or maybe even your imagination will go wild thinking about what actually happened. And the big problem with that is a lot of us just stay in that negative state of ruminating on it, playing that story over and over again, and reliving those emotions over and over again. It fuels that fire. And when we react negatively to something, our brain will bring it up over and over again, because we're trying to come to some sort of resolution. We want to feel comfortable. That's our brain's natural state, is survival and to be comfortable. The next thing is we have to understand we're in control of our own emotions. Things happen, but no one can make us feel anything. We feel them on our own based on the way that we think about the situation, and we have to understand our feelings and our reactions are our responsibility. You could have the worst things happen to you in the world, you can feel however you want, but you have to understand ultimately the way you react is your responsibility. The way that you feel is your responsibility. So we can and we should absolutely acknowledge when someone does something to us, when they betray us, when they hurt us, when they do something we don't like to us. But we can also understand we are in control of our own emotions. So be aware when you are in an emotional state, you are choosing to stay in that state, and that's okay. Sometimes we need to stay in that state and able to overcome it, absolutely. But you have to be aware of when you're doing it too long, that is then a choice. So that's when you want to call yourself out and be aware of when you're just staying in it, when you're venting too much, because there is such a thing as when you vent to so many people and you're doing it over and over again, you are keeping yourself in that place. Studies show that people that vent more are more miserable. There needs to be that balance of being able to feel your emotions, but also being able to get yourself out of those emotions too. And you want to feel empowered, because when you're in that victim state of feeling like everyone's doing everything to you, you then feel out of control. You feel powerless. It's a lot more empowering recognizing your own emotions and taking control of them and be like, this is my emotion and this is what I'm going to do to get out of it. No matter what anyone does to me, this is how I'm going to handle it. You always want to be in a state of empowerment rather than helplessness, a victim. You want to be a victor. The next thing is that you want to challenge the story that you're telling yourself. So not only when something happens to you do you want to be able to feel your emotions, self-soothe, nurture yourself through it, love yourself through it, use that reparenting language, but you also want to be able to identify when you're replaying this negative story, or even the story that you don't have a lot of evidence to back it up. So before you come to your ultimate conclusion, you want to challenge yourself to make sure that you have all the facts to back it up. So for instance, like if something happens and you immediately think this is the reason that it happened, challenge yourself and be like, wait a minute, what proof do I have that this happened? What evidence do I have? Did they tell me this happened? Did someone else tell me that that's what happened? Like, where's the evidence that this actually happened? Do you actually really know if that's what happened? Or like if you notice yourself getting very stuck in the future, ask yourself, how does this benefit me right now? Is this something that I need to worry about right now? Is this a real concern, or am I making it a concern? Is this a story that I'm making up in my head entirely because it's a fear? You want to ask yourself, how does this affect you now? Even with thinking about the past too much, you want to ask yourself, like, how does this affect me now, and what is in my control? Does it really help me to stay in this negative state? Also, when someone hurts you, you want to look at the bigger picture. Sometimes it's not personal. Sometimes it's something on their end where they are just, maybe they're a miserable person, or they didn't realize how it affect you. Like, for instance, passive aggressive people. That's my biggest pet peeve. I hate passive aggressiveness. That triggers me to the end. But I understand, or I'm coming to the understanding, that passive aggressiveness, it really has nothing to do with me. It has to do with them and their inability to be able to be upfront or discuss things. So that's a problem on their end. And those are the times when you need to look at yourself and be like, well, maybe I don't need to take it so personally because it's something to do with them. And also another thing, don't be afraid to ask questions. So if something happens and you see it a certain way, don't be afraid to be like, hey, listen, this is the way I'm taking it. Let me know if this is what happened. Or you can ask them, is this what you meant? Is this what you were intending? And so that way they can clarify, because a lot of times, like I said, we make up these stories in our head and it's not necessarily true. We are just trying to fill in the blanks. So always try to see it from a different perspective and challenge those perspectives when you come to a conclusion but you don't have enough evidence to really back it up. And the last thing is, if you are having a hard time getting out of a funk, then you have to do things differently. Sometimes it takes doing an action to get you out of that mental state. So sometimes you need to take a walk. Sometimes you need to call a friend and just have a laugh. Maybe you need to go to the mall, maybe do a little shopping. You know, that's when you need to pay attention to your needs and really give yourself those needs. That's part of self-care and self-love. Maybe you need to go and get like a little massage. Also, like, smiling is something that's really helpful as well. So if you notice yourself, you're in a bad mood and you want to immediately get yourself out of a bad mood, smile. Because smiling sends signals to your brain to release some dopamine, you know, that pleasure chemical. So try right now, you know, try to frown. You'll probably feel angry. I talk about this in my confidence video. And then try to smile afterwards. And you'll notice that you're not really that angry anymore. So remember, if you are staying in a negative place and you're staying a victim, it ultimately then becomes a choice. You're choosing to stay in that place. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't deal with your emotions and work through them, because absolutely 100% you should always feel your emotions first, self-soothe, reparent, but then you have to recognize when you're just staying in that state and you're staying in that victim mentality. So what do you guys think? Leave it all in the comments below, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and share with somebody you think may need it. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye guys. Oh, I just sat on my notes. Actually, no, should I do my intro? I should do my intro. Okay. They help us identify things. I was in my groove and my phone goes off. What am I trying to say? What you doing? Where you at? If you know that song, comment below, because Anderson has my heart. Tell me that isn't the cutest thing you ever saw.